And for those just joining us, Brian Williams here in New York, but all eyes are on the situation in Boston. This was the live television picture showing what we now know to be the first of two explosions. In the center of your screen, you see a runner go down after getting hit by a piece of shrapnel. You see the smoke plume rise no less than 50 yards from the finish line, and then a second explosion seconds later, just a short distance down the street, appears to be equidistant from the route of the race. Both explosions appear to have been located at or near the base of buildings at the finish line of the Boston Marathon this afternoon on Patriots Day, about an hour after the first highest-ranking elite finishers. And sadly, the injuries we are hearing about being triaged and taken to hospitals are consistent with what you would find in similar explosions in a war zone. We're choosing not to report any numbers early on because there's going to be great confusion with several metropolitan hospitals getting the wounded from this. If there's any good news to report at all, and it's a double-edged sword because they were likely among the wounded, you had public safety officials right there. The medical tent was within view of the first explosion. You had Boston PD, fire, EMS, all there on duty because of the secured finish line. These were initial aerials from our station, WHDH in Boston. Right there at the top of your screen, you see the white powder aftermath of an explosion. That was what's left of the reviewing stand. The black truck's part of Boston PD as they investigate. The feds were en route. And you see the aftermath from an explosion on that sidewalk. No other way to put it. Windows were blown out, flags were blown down. You saw the barricade came down, and runners who were just yards from, for several of them, accomplishing the greatest feat of their lifetime, one of the great athletic achievements there is, 26.2 miles in the famed Boston Marathon, one of the most famous public sporting events in this country, and instead knocked off their feet by one of two concussive explosions at the finish line. Way too early to draw any conclusions. This is just into us. Three separate law enforcement officials are looking very closely at the possibility that this is, to use military parlance again, an improvised explosive device, an IED, that this could have been a bag or satchel, that this somehow eluded race day security, whether it was pre-positioned or came in during the excitement of the finish and escaped the attention of sniffer dogs and electronics. Let's listen in once again to WHDH.
We don't really know because this all happened close to the medical tent, and as you know, they have those foil wraps. Another ambulance pulling in right now, anticipating yet another person here. The people here at Boston Medical Center don't have a firm count, an official count, because people are still coming in. So they haven't come down to give us much information. We've only been able to glean from what we can see outside here. I have to admit, just a couple of minutes ago, there was a very it looked like a very heart-wrenching scene. A mother and a couple of other young women came running out of the hospital. They jumped into a car. I asked them if they lost someone or if they had someone in that explosion, and she said, yes, my daughter, we're trying to find her. So apparently they're going from hospital to hospital to see. Someone else is coming in right now. You see someone going in on a stretcher. He is sitting up. Again, we don't know if this is an individual from the who was watching the marathon. However, He just did come in an ambulance, and he went in the same door that the other victims, who clearly were from the marathon, went in. But inside the hospital, we've been told that it's quite chaotic inside. A lot of nurses and hospital personnel who are off today have been called in to help out, and we understand also a description from someone who was inside and talking to some of the staff here, said that there are a number of people here with very severe injuries. So that's the scene here at the Boston Medical Center, again, where the ambulances, you can hear the ambulances coming and going. We, again, with our own eyes, have seen at least 6 people come in here, possibly 7. Again, people with the foil wrapped around them, people laying on stretchers going in here. The situation inside described as mayhem and quite chaotic inside the hospital as well. That's the latest live from Boston Medical Center. I'm Byron Barnett.
So that's live coverage that our viewers in Boston are receiving from WHDH. Just a terrible day, and what should have been just a magnificent day for the city of Boston, the annual running of the Boston Marathon. Mike Gleason, with apologies. Mike Gleason's an NYPD veteran who was just a spectator today, had a member of the family running in the race. And, Mike, I guess since you saw this, do you have any reason to add anything to the descriptions thus far? We are now able to see it as recorded by live TV cameras, but did your trained eyes catch anything? Did you detect anything amiss?
No, it just everything was normal. Everyone was relaxed and happy and joyous. Everyone was drinking their water and wrapping themselves in foil, and then an explosion right next to the finish line, and then within another maybe 30 seconds, another explosion, and then pandemonium struck.
I mean, I don't know if you heard me saying, and I hate to say this, but this is how it's done overseas. An initial and a secondary, just as people are rushing toward the wounded from the initial explosion.
And my worst concern, Brian, was we had my 2 children, my friend's 2 children. We put them into a Sprint store. They were kind enough to let us in there. And then once we were able to get moving, we wanted to get away from any area where there was a high concentration of people.
Yeah, it's sad to say, but people who have any exposure to military or law enforcement are often prompted to get out of there instead of doing what is human nature and rushing in to help, only because of the risk of a secondary explosion in this cruel era of such things. But it looks like there you have, that's again the best picture right there, the powder burns against the side of the building, and then again the reviewing stand. Mike Gleason, thank you very much. We have the first facts from this from the Boston Police Department, and this is pretty grim. Boston PD is reporting by Twitter, 2 dead, 22 injured. And again, 23 now, 2 dead, 23 injured. Again, we know from eyewitness reports, from what we've heard on our Boston station, some of these injuries are grievous injuries consistent with what happens when an explosion goes off in a tight urban area. Look at the facade of that building. You had people between that building and the police barricades, and then you set off an explosion, and this is what's going to happen. Flags, banners gave way. People were hit, and look at human nature. Run toward the explosion. That's right when the second one went off in the space of about 15 to 20 seconds. Of course, a lot of these people, not only is it their job, it's their reflex. These are public safety officials. These are race volunteers. A saving grace, most of the police officers you see with the bright green vests are also in this day and age wearing Kevlar vests. So let's hope that there are Boston PD members who were able to survive this and help by dint of that. But it's something to think about. Maybe it made the difference in a few cases. This is Patriots Day in the city of Boston. Commemorating Lexington and Concord. This was the day of a Red Sox game. Fenway Park is about 1.5 miles away from this The closest intersection, what we're talking about here, is Boylston and Dartmouth. In Boston, we had a picture across the Charles River showing the smoke plume from these dual explosions. Again, no one has said anything official. It will take forensic testing of the residue from the explosion, but there are certain accelerants and certain explosives that will immediately tell investigators this was not a gas main. This was not a kind of naturally occurring explosion from the systems contained in a large American city. This was an explosive that was put there to do harm. We don't know that yet. It is just quite a coincidence otherwise that we have two concussive impacts here on the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Again, the aerial pictures from our NBC station, WHDH-TV in Boston, where they will continue live coverage. All shifts have been called to work, goes without saying. Boston PD. Let's listen in to some of the eyewitness reports our station's getting.
I don't think they could even comprehend what's happened here. People reported hearing two explosions a short time ago near the finish line. I think we've already established that, but you can just see the emotion.
I've been corrected. This is the audio that goes with these initial aerial pictures. So this is part of the early live reporting. Let's see if we can't switch channels and dip into what WHDH is saying right now. Can we do that?
Still trying to find his wife, who often waits for him at the finish line. I also ran into a man. He was covered with a blood-stained shirt, and I stopped him and I asked him if he was okay, and he just said, "I'm a doctor," and proceeded onto the scene. There was a line of dozens of wheelchairs from the medical team making their way over still to the finish line. We're still trying to figure out and get more details, but as you walk the area here in the back bay, you just see so many runners still wrapped in their metallic blankets with their families, still trying to locate their families. But as you can imagine, with so many streets in and around the Boylston area closed, they're having a hard time locating and reuniting with their family members. Again, it is a very difficult scene. There are several people stopping, others asking if they know more details. Have they heard more? Is there more information? And as I understand, there will be a news conference with Boston Fire in just about a couple of minutes. But as I'm walking around, there's just a lot of people still shell-shocked, still trying to share information with each other, but have very little information of their own.
All right, Susan, thank you so much. And we're just getting some new information from Mass General that they have no reported deaths at the hospital, but they have a total of 19 patients, 6 of whom are listed in critical condition, 5 of whom listed in serious condition, 8 patients with unspecified injuries. And we do know that there was a news conference scheduled for Mass General. So we take a look outside Mass General, some video from outside the hospital. We are being told that a news conference will be taking place at the hospital here within the next few minutes. So when that happens, we'll, of course, bring it to you when it does happen. But again, Boston police confirming 2 people died in these explosions, 23 people hurt at the finish line, although I actually would argue that the number probably is going to go up, Amanda, at least the injured, because we have 19 injuries at MGH, and I would imagine that Boston Medical Center, Brigham and Women's, probably has as many people as well.
You know, we just spoke to Byron Barnett. He's seen 6 people being transported to Boston Medical Center, so add that to the 19,
right.
And, you know, already we're above the total there. And the numbers are changing. Just minutes ago it was 22. Now we're getting word there have been 23 injuries and 2 deaths.
Getting some new now information.
Again, on a day like this, you look for silver linings. We have some first-class hospitals within very, very short distance. Mass General being one of them we've just heard discussed there in Boston, and certainly the folks who've been who've become victims in this this explosion you see there on tape replay were triaged immediately by the medical professionals who were there for the medical tent for the marathon, and then transported immediately to any number of hospitals in Boston. Chuck Todd can show us what's happening in Washington, which again has become an almost standard reaction these days when something happens that we can't define right away, and a preponderance of caution has to be enforced. Pennsylvania Avenue, which was closed to vehicular traffic in the late 1990s, has been closed to pedestrian traffic in front of the White House this afternoon as the Capitol Police, Park Police, Secret Service form something of an outer ring of security there. So you're looking, is Chuck? Can Chuck hear me? Or Chuck, are you with us?
I can, Brian.
Okay,
yeah,
so
no,
we're looking. We're looking out through the White House fence, across the street, and the perimeter is now on the other side of Pennsylvania.
That's right, and you see now they've erected yellow tape. Secret Service, uniformed Secret Service, as you can see, is now sort of standing watch there. This is not dissimilar to what you see when there's a head of state that comes in here for a few minutes. So this is the same type of lockdown that Pennsylvania Avenue is going through when that happens. So again, and I know you've said it, it is more out of precaution for now than anything else. One other little tidbit I can report from various security sources that a joint anti-terrorism task force phone call between state, federal, and local officials has not yet taken place, but that is going. They're starting to organize that with Boston authorities, Massachusetts authorities, and federal authorities to sort of get the information flow sharing in a way that everybody can be on the same page. They're trying to set that up now as we speak, Brian.
And Chuck, perhaps you can help me describe that. I didn't mean to be flip when I said it's become a standard post 9/11 response, but there have been numerous times where, because of numerous scares and just exerting great caution, journalists have been escorted off the grounds, visitors, staffers. Correct. These perimeters have been put up.
But I can also tell you they are letting people with appointments through. They are letting people with passes. So it's a low-grade lockdown, if you will, at this point. Not at the type that you just described, where you're right. They will tell us all to leave, or if we're here, they won't let us even outside where we're all standing right now. So for now, this is more about a precaution, keeping tourists away and people without proper credentials away from the facility.
Okay, Chuck Todd, thank you. We're now showing live pictures. I believe this is the ER entrance at Mass General, and it's Boston Medical, sorry. And this appears to be back on Boylston, a Boston fire unit going by. This is, I believe, tape from earlier. We heard something else start to happen as part of our live coverage on WHDH. In big cities where terrible things have happened, you start to have the cell service go down because the bandwidth is finite. So that will happen and has been happening to some of the live reports out of Boston. I want to bring in an expert we've had of counsel on our staff for a good long time, Michael Leiter, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, national security analyst for us. He served as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center from 2008 to July of 2011, was in the room during the bin Laden raid. Michael, you've been watching and listening to the coverage. Give us an expert's eye view. What do you think we have here, and what would you be looking for?
Well, the first thing I would say, Brian, is at this point, kind of an hour into the event, we still have to accept that the information is going to be incredibly fragmentary, and a lot of it's going to be wrong. All of the Boston City Police Department, the federal government, mostly the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the White House, everyone is now scrambling to understand what exactly happened in that location. And away from Boston, people are starting to put in place some of the preventative security measures that Chuck Todd just mentioned at the White House. So I expect that we'll start to see some additional police presence in cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. My initial take right now, this could turn out to be anything, but it's a heck of a coincidence to happen right at the end of the Boston Marathon route. Certainly no one in the U.S. government is saying authoritatively what caused this, terrorism or something else, a natural gas explosion. But I think the forensic examination by the police, potentially claims if a group was responsible, that should start to be uncovered the next hour or two, and I expect we'll have a lot better sense of what has actually occurred in Boston today.
And Michael, taking your caution, the caution of a veteran and a professional in this field, just going, however, from the kind of amateur visual forensics of looking at the aerial and seeing the powder burns on the sidewalk emanating from the side of the building, radiating out into the street, has the hallmarks of explosions you and I have seen in the past.
That's absolutely right. And if I were still director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and I would guess my successor and everyone in the U.S. government in Boston right now is operating under the assumption that this is a terrorist attack. Now, knowing exactly who's behind that will take some time. People will start from the premise that this was terrorism, and they will work their way backwards. Now, publicly, some of those statements will be, we're not sure, we're going to wait until all the facts get in, but everyone will operate as if this was a terrorist attack. Again, I think the timing, the coincidence of this being right at the finish of a major public event, that would certainly lead me in the direction to say that this looks very, very early on like a terrorist attack.
And earlier I said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that even initial tests, I mean, explosives experts will be able to walk up, smell, and touch this, and wouldn't the presence of cordite indicate, well, this is no manhole cover, this is no gas leak?
I think that's going to be ruled out relatively quickly. I think you're exactly right. Now, you can have different types of explosives which may or may not be as easily detectable. Hydrogen peroxide-based explosives have been used in the past by terrorists, and it may take them some time to figure that out. But I do expect that within the next hour or so, the Boston Police Department, which is a very talented and good organization that has deep counterterrorism expertise, working with the FBI-led Federal Joint Terrorism Task Force in Boston, they're going to know in very short order whether or not this is a natural event or a terrorist bomb. Now, again, exactly who's responsible for that bomb, that will take more in the range of days rather than hours. But I think we'll know in very short order what the root cause of this was.
Michael, we're going to just continue. This is going to be the way it is. We're going to dip into our local coverage, NBC station, WHDH, Boston live coverage of what's happening in their town.
And then saw smoke. As I was walking, I saw one man. He was covered with blood on his shirt, and I had to stop and ask him if he was okay. And he walked briskly by me and just said, "I'm a doctor." And as I continued on, I saw there were still people who were making their way through the finish line as they were trying to find their loved ones, find their significant others, and let them know they were okay. I ran into our reporter, 7 News reporter Steve Cooper. As you know, he runs the marathon every year. He was very upset. He was okay, but he still had not found his wife, who was often at the finish line awaiting him. We're still trying to figure out, hopefully, that she is just fine and just they have not been able to reunite. I'm at an area on Newberry Street. It's all closed off. They're concerned about secondary explosions here. I can see the medical tent, but it's closed off, so I can't tell you just how many people are in there. But as I was making my way, I did see dozens of these wheelchairs from the medical team trying to make their way to the scene. They were just dozens lined up and making their way towards the Boylston area. And as you can imagine, there are just so many people, visitors in the area, and they still just don't know how to get around. Many are just so upset about what happened here.
Susan, you're on Newbury Street. Can you just tell us, are there a lot of people there with you right now? Or are they just kind of hanging around trying to figure out what's happening? Or have people cleared out, and is Newbury Street effectively a ghost town outside of you, media, police, fire, and whatnot?
I'm on Newberry Street. Street and Dartmouth Street, and it is a ghost town. It is very eerie to see Newbury is this quiet. The only other time I remember this is when we had that Back Bay blackout. But on all of the on the secondary streets, Clarendon, Berkeley, Arlington, Common Ave area, the Huntington Street area, the area by the John Hancock building, tons of people are still there, and many are trying to figure out how to get home, how to get back to their hotel rooms, how to get to their friends' homes. Many, as you know, are visitors here, so they don't know how to navigate through the streets. There is just a difficulty not only walking around, but the mass transit, the T's are not working, and there's a lot of confusion out here in terms of for the runners and visitors.
Susan Tran joining us on the phone at Newbury and Dartmouth. Susan, thank you so much, and of course we'll be checking back with you here momentarily. We
do want to get to Janet Wu. 7's Janet Wu has been covering this story. In fact, Janet, you were there on what was supposed to be, a happy story. A lot of folks finishing a marathon and a lot of excitement down there, and here you are. I understand you've been pushed back from the scene. Is that correct?
Yes, that's why you hadn't seen me for about an hour, because we were right at Boylston and Clarendon, which is a block and a half from where these explosions happened. We now have had to clear the scene, as this is a ghost town on Boylston Street. It is completely empty. And then just within the last half an hour, they started shutting down the side streets. I think it's a bad sign, but about 10 minutes ago, we saw a dozen police cars come screaming down Clarendon past us. We could not see where they were going, but obviously there are other things that are still keeping this case quite active, and it's not just these first two explosions. I want to point out something else. From years of reporting here, we always say every year that the medical tent, what you see behind me here on my right, way down there on Stewart Street, right in front of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, that becomes the largest ER in the city every year on this one day. They prepare to take care of more than 1,000 runners. So there are more emergency beds in that tent than there are in any of the other hospitals in Boston combined. And today, very sadly, this tent has been used for a very unexpected and horrible tragedy. But as we've said over and over again, just moments after this explosion happened, the first one, response was immediate. I want to recap for you again what we saw, because we actually saw the explosions from our vantage point. We were in the truck. We heard the first one. We saw smoke coming out, and at first we thought it was perhaps some kind of cannon that was celebrating this marathon and not something that was devastating. We're running this video now that was taken by my colleague Don Nelson, who was manned on the bridge over the finish line. You see that bridge that they build every year in order to get all the runners coming across, that overhead view of the runners. He caught that explosion, and again, from eyewitness accounts, they saw two packages or bags, as someone described to me, against the building near 671 Boylston Street. That's a little bit more than halfway down the block from Dartmouth towards Exeter on the Newbury Street side. Again, those two explosions happened very, very close together. And then a little while after, another eyewitness who was frantically running in the other direction told me that he felt that he had heard that other devices had been found. That was something I could not really report initially, since this was unconfirmed. But then we heard that third explosion that was later confirmed to be a controlled explosion. And indeed, that was another device that was found. At this point, we have still not had official comment from law enforcement. They are still too busy dealing with this case. We're expecting, as you know, that that news conference come up in a short time later, but we've been reporting the numbers. Very devastating, the number of injuries and deaths from this. And that is the latest from where I am right now in Clarendon at Stewart Street. Janet Wu, 7 News.
Janet, I want to just touch upon something you said just a few moments ago. You mentioned that clearly you got the idea that something, you got pushed back so that there is clearly something still happening. We got a note earlier from counterterrorism officials, and just to let you know, and bomb technicians, that there were multiple explosive devices. Clearly the two that went off at the finish line on Boylston. There was a third device that they found, and that bomb technicians did a controlled explosion. They set it off themselves. So, but it leads us to believe in this note that we read earlier that there may be more devices in and around that area, which is exactly probably why police moved you in part and is trying to clear that area out of here.
Well, Reed, now I can tell you, because before I did not feel comfortable reporting this, but initially, right after that explosion, maybe it was a reporter instinct, I went tearing down Boylston the opposite way to go to the library grandstands, because that's where I thought it was. The explosions happened right across from it. I went up to the grandstand, saw the location, saw the blown out windows, and a police officer came up to me and said, "Get out of here. We don't know what else could happen." And at that point, I have to tell you, I was terrified.
We've been listening to this breaking news. Here's Mass General Hospital live news conference.
Runners coming through who were turning around to find their family members again, because of course they have to.
Our understanding is that that is false. We still have the hazmat team on standby, but we've not received anybody who've received any hazardous materials exposure.
What are the injuries you're seeing?
Mostly orthopedic injuries, traumatic amputations, injuries to arms and legs. Those are the ones that we're seeing at this time.
So is the surgery right now an amputation?
Well, some of the patients have already received traumatic amputations at the scene. Their legs, if you like, have been blown off. And obviously they're bleeding profusely, so in conjunction with Boston EMS, who were right on the scene, they managed to stop the bleeding, but they'll be in the operating room already.
Doctor, can we have your name, please, and spell?
Sure, my name is Dr. Alistair Khan, first name A-L-A-S-D-A-I-R, last name Khan, C-O-N-N, and I'm Chief of Emergency Services here at MGH.
And one more time, you said 6 are severely injured?
Yes, 6 is very severely injured, requiring immediate resuscitation. We've obviously mobilized not just the trauma team on for today, but the backup team and the backup to the backup team. So they're all either, they responded to the emergency department, but they're probably now in surgery.
And what about the others? You said 16 others or 19 others?
19 patients in total.
And what kind of injuries do they have?
At the moment, they mostly appear to be orthopedics. However, we've not completely assessed them because they haven't managed to give them all x-rays and CAT scans and things at the moment yet.
So you said 6 critical and 5 pretty badly off as well?
That's correct. That's correct, yes.
Would you characterize these as almost something you'd see in a military setting? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is like a bomb explosion that we hear about in the news in Baghdad or Israel or some other tragic space in the world, yeah.
And you have trained for that here, just in case?
Absolutely. About 2 years ago, in actual fact, we asked these...
Cut away that we're not in control of the feed from the news conference, but we got the gist of it there. I think much will be said. That obviously no 2 explosions are alike, but if you take as an assumption that this was an explosive device and not the kind of explosion caused by a big city mishap, a gas main or what have you. Let's say this was indeed a parcel left behind to do harm. There are different types, and it's a grisly business, but many contain shrapnel, many of what we've seen deployed in our dual wars overseas. If this one did not, if it was just concussive, there may be speculation that it was made of materials that were designed to elude any detection on its way in. Made of perhaps organic materials that wouldn't give off the scent signature that would cause alarm. Who knows? We're so early in this. The smoke has almost literally just cleared from Boylston in Boston, the finish line bombing at the Boston Marathon today. Dean Walker was part of the Universal Sports broadcasting team in a production trailer. He's with us by telephone. Dean, I'm told that you apparently were alerted by the first blast and had enough time to react and were an eyewitness to the second one, correct? What did you see?
That is correct. Approximately about 2:50, we were preparing for our wrap-up show for the Boston Marathon, and literally our production trucks were parked right across the street from where the first bomb went off. That first bomb shook the truck very violently. That's when we turned to look at the screen, and we saw the second bomb go off approximately 100 feet up the course on the opposite side of the of Boylston from where we were at.
And this was we've been just going by the picture from the photo bridge as taken, live pictures that were taken by WHDH. And I've been assuming here that you have kind of the usual mixture of people from the edge of the building out to the police barricade. You have friends and family, people who know somebody racing, people who got there early, staked out a position. Then you have race volunteers and law enforcement all along that barricade, correct?
Absolutely. And that side of the street had more public access than the side of the street we were on, because we were on the side of the street of the grandstands, the VIP grandstands. That side of the street had a lot more foot traffic and a lot less security measures because it was basically open to the public. Okay, well, that may end up being a critical difference here. The debris from the bomb, the explosion, we should say, the debris from the explosion that we see hit and injure one runner kind of as we watch, did it have the range to reach across the street to the reviewing stand? From our perspective, we don't think so. When we saw the smoke come up from the blast, it was isolated pretty much to the sidewalk, and it did not detonate right at the edge of the sidewalk. It was back away from the edge of the street, probably at least 10 to 15 feet. I'm almost happy we don't have a tighter shot of this because of the injuries suffered by that one runner who has just kind of become the focal point of that picture as we play it over and over. This is tough to take on a repetitive basis. And ditto these pictures. There's a whole lot of folks there in the crowd. And Dean, we had a third explosion, which Boston PD has now confirmed was a controlled explosion of what they suspected was yet another device. Were you aware of that from where you were escorted to within Boston? We weren't aware of that until we returned back to our hotel, which is about a half a mile away from the explosions. But we were told that where that device was probably closer to us than the first device that went off. Dean Walker with Universal Sports, thank you very much for being with us. Sardar Azturk is with us as well. Sardar, you're an eyewitness to this. Tell us what you saw and from what angle.
So I was about a half a block away. I left the Fairmont Hotel, which is another half block away from the finish line, and I was about to eat, and I heard a bomb go off. I heard a loud explosion, and I felt it through my legs and all the way into my chest. And everyone at that moment had pretty much stopped moving and was just in awe and didn't know what was happening, whether it was a bomb, whether it was just something that had fallen or whatever. But next thing you know, we heard a second explosion, and then if you looked outside, people immediately, their faces turned into tears and were running for their lives, basically. And again, what would you put, just ballpark the radius of the concussion? Well, I mean, it didn't even matter about the radius. Like, within the block that it happened, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people around. Like, not even near the finish line, blocks away, streets are completely full, completely filled with people who are just running. I was half a block away, and I could see the smoke in the air. You could almost smell the smoke as well. Sardar, thank you very much. Sardar Azturk has been one of the eyewitnesses joining us as part of our live coverage. I want to show you a photo that's getting wide circulation from the editorial staff, one of the staff photographers from the Boston Globe. Let's take the banner down, the special report banner, and if we can take the lower banner down, what is in the foreground is the runner, I believe we see, getting injured and hit with shrapnel. This is obviously just after it happens. What you can't see beneath that black banner that says Boston Globe Sports
is the runner I believe we see hit on the replay of the videotape. This is the smoke from the initial concussion. You see officers are still reacting, and there he is. He's down. He is injured. The officer in the center of the picture, about 10 feet back, appears to be being blown off his feet. And this is just a chance taking of a photo at the moment right after impact, when the air, the whoosh, is still coming from right to left in your picture. But that's one of the still photos getting a lot of circulation on the web. Mike Lupica is with us, the veteran sports columnist and author and broadcaster. And Mike, this is hard to believe. What a you talk about the finite list of great American public events and sporting traditions in a great American city. This is at or near the top.
Brian, I went to Boston College. My sons have gone to Boston. My sister used to run this race every year. Unless you have ever attended this race, and I used to cover it all the time. I was at the finish line last year walking back from Fenway Park. This isn't just a state holiday in Boston. This is the biggest day of the year in Boston. And for me to look at these pictures today and see people running away from the finish line of the Boston Marathon is one of the most chilling things I've ever seen.
Mike, it's hard to express. People familiar with urban environments, it's really densely packed. We talk about Newbury Street. If you know Michigan Avenue in Chicago or Fifth Avenue, it's kind of a combination of Fifth and Madison in New York. It's a beautiful, strolling, shopping gallery street not far from Boylston, where we're looking at. These are tightly packed buildings. Everybody is filling the streets on this day. 26,000 runners. Think of how many bring their posses with them of friends and family and supporters.
It stretches all the way along the course, Brian, but you're exactly right. This is one of the main plazas of the city. It is one of the great walking areas. And unless you've ever been at the finish line, we used to guess it was a joke how many people were at the finish line. I was standing once with Neil Amdur of the New York Times, and I said, "What did we call the crowd last year?" And he said, "I think it was 1 million." And I said, "It looked like more this year." And so we said, "Well, we better go with 1.5 million." And some guy behind us said, "I was wondering how you guys came up with that number." It is filled with people. It is their version on a spring day of New York City and Times Square on New Year's Eve. And if you are trying to navigate your way around Boston on this day, good luck. You feel like you've run a Boston Marathon yourself, just getting from point to point. But all you see are happy people, Brian, until today.
And, of course, Mike, now they've shut down the T, which is the Boston subway system. Now you have all these visitors. Some, a lot of them from overseas, but many of them from all across the country. This is the focal point of all their training for the year. This man in the still picture from the Boston Globe staff, think of just his story. By nature, this means he finished just like an hour off the elite finishers. So think of how hard, and think of the meaning of this in his life. He ends up being a wounded victim of an explosion at the finish line of the Boston Marathon.
Brian, you never had to be there to see the winners finish. It didn't matter what time you got to Copley Square. All you saw were happy people crossing the finish line, and then in the outlying parts of that, you'd see them with some kind of cover on, happy, tired people, not running away from this finish line like they did today, but walking and trying to find their friends and family. And on this day when everybody was trying to find friends and family after this happened.
Mike Lupica, thanks for being with us. Thanks for the perspective. It's a sad announcement on the Boston Marathon Facebook page right now. The family meeting area has been moved to Boston Common. Runners are being directed there to meet friends and family. City of Boston assets have been deployed to assist runners at the Common. I'm also thinking of Mayor Menino, who has had a bunch of health challenges, announcing he will not be running for re-election. Spent a chunk of time in the hospital. Most recently was being treated for a broken leg. This was obviously his favorite day of the year. There's no bigger booster of the city of Boston than Tom Menino. And now to have this, we have every federal agent in the region heading to Boston, Massachusetts. We're just going to keep putting these pictures on the air as they come in. You see all the yellow vests of first responders. Remember how many were already there. Pete Williams, our justice correspondent. Pete, sadly, as I keep saying, we have way too much expertise in explosives and terrorism investigation over these past 10 years. Let us hope that we can put that to good use very quickly here.
Well, I think it's already turning out to be that way, Brian. First of all, the initial analysis that there were 2 devices that went off and 2 more that they quickly found. Now, what they're going to be doing now, of course, is proceeding on several tracks. There'll be a team of people who will go in there and try to pick up every little piece that they can of these devices. We believe for sure they were devices that went off. We don't know how much they're going to be able to get out of the other 2 because it appears that they very quickly, in the term they use is rendered them safe, meaning that they shoot a high-velocity, extremely short-pulse water cannon at them to blow them up. So we don't know how much a look they got at them before that happened. But in terms of the other ones, they'll look at the pieces. That's one track. Now, the second thing they're doing, of course, is going around and trying to find every person who was in the area to interview them. And a third thing, which could turn out to be very productive, is looking for surveillance video, of which there's undoubtedly a lot in this area. Very congested metropolitan area, hotels nearby, businesses. They're going to look and see if they see any of these things being placed to try to figure out, you know, when they were there, who might have placed them, and that'll be a key part of the investigation as well.
Pete, I keep thinking about the surveillance video. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, everywhere we go, especially in high-density urban areas these days, you've got to be okay with being on TV because there are usually multiple views of you. Here in New York City, they have software that makes the cameras smart. The cameras can visually look for containers that don't have someone attached to them, containers that are new to the frame. I am assuming some of that technology exists in Boston, and I am also assuming that they're looking at the possibility that if these came in to be placed where they did during competition, that they were built in somehow to evade detection.
That's certainly possible, and we should know more about that, I would think, in the coming hours as they begin to look at whatever pieces they can find. And in terms of the surveillance video, yes, all the things that you just said, and then also, of course, the timing here is going to be important because they can work back from the time of the detonations and look for anomalies, things that weren't there and suddenly showed up. So that'll be a key part of this.
Pete, we should also talk about the kind of chain of anticipatable events, 90% of them out of a preponderance of caution that we're probably going to end up reporting. There is a report of a ground stop for incoming flights into Boston Logan. We've already seen the White House perimeter moved out and across Pennsylvania Avenue. There is a kind of a, not quite a lockdown mentality, but I would imagine we'll have reservists with automatic weapons in New York's Grand Central, if we don't already, LaGuardia, and so on and so forth.
Yes, that's already been ordered for New York, and I think part of that is until they know for sure what this was, the prudent thing is to assume that this was the beginning of something that could be going on elsewhere. No reason to think that. But the smart thing to do these days, is the belief, is to take those precautions now in case, you know, or the other thing is they have to worry about copycats, somebody else trying this elsewhere. This sort of circumstance, you know, of course, we're reminded of the Olympic Park bombing in Atlanta. The other thing that this calls to my mind is 3 years ago, somebody leaving a backpack, and it turned out to be somebody who was a white supremacist who was convicted of this, leaving a backpack on a bench in Portland, waiting for the Martin Luther King parade to come by, and the device was to be remotely set off, but it was found by a city employee and was safely taken away. So, unfortunately, people have been thinking about doing these sorts of things before.
Obviously, a perverse notion to begin with, leaving a device behind that would blow up in a public place, but the further perversion of doing this to this event on this day under the noses of all of the assembled law enforcement in Boston is beyond bodacious.
Well, and of course, you know, who knows, if it turns out that one of these was right outside a hotel, I guess you always have the possibility, and I'm sure they'll look at it, that somebody planned this before the security was in place,
right,
had it somewhere else, and then brought it out at the time. So there's lots of scenarios here that we could come up with, and, you know, until we know how they did it, there's lots of possibilities to think about.
And Pete, the way 9/11 has changed life, because it happened, a lot of it gradually. We haven't even kind of come to grips with it in some. You can't go to a Royals game in Kansas City or a Dodgers game in L.A. without, you know, being checked. It has changed a lot. We are looking at the governor of Massachusetts as he gets ready to address the media. Sorry, Pete Williams, we're going to take this live feed.
Well, we've had a horrific attack here in Boston this afternoon. Commissioner Davis is going to give some details about what we know so far. Mindful that we don't have the whole picture yet, but we have gotten a good deal of information. Commissioner Davis will take all of us through the information that we have, and then I'll come back and talk about some of the things and ways in which we're going to ask people to help us help you this afternoon. So let me turn it over now to Ed Davis, Commissioner of Police here in Boston.
Thank you, Governor. At 2:50 p.m. today, there were simultaneous explosions that occurred along the route of the Boston Marathon near the finish line. These explosions occurred 50 to 100 yards apart, and each scene resulted in multiple casualties. At this point in time, all of the victims have been removed from the scene. We have sent officers to hospitals to be in touch with family members and possible witnesses. We immediately activated a system of response that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the federal government has in place for these type of incidents. My first two calls were to the special agent in charge of the FBI and to the colonel of the state police. Both Rick Delorier and Tim Albans immediately sent resources. We have, at this point in time, determined that there has been a third incident that has occurred. There was an explosion that occurred at the JFK Library. So this is very much an ongoing event at this point in time. We are not certain that these incidents are related, but we are treating them as if they are. We're recommending to people that they stay home, that if they're in hotels in the area, that they return to their rooms, and that they don't go anyplace and congregate in large crowds. We want to make sure we completely stabilize the situation. We are setting up two telephone numbers that are very important. The first one is for families of victims and people who are trying to locate people. That number is 617-635-4500. That is the mayor's hotline. The second number, if anyone saw anything at this incident, if anybody knows of any information that could lead to the arrest and prosecution of the individuals responsible for this, they should call us at 1-800-494-TIPS. That's 1-800-494-TIPS. That line will be staffed up tonight, along with the FBI and the state police. We are working with the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. We have a general here from the Massachusetts National Guard who has assisted in securing the perimeter. And we have additional assets from other agencies who are volunteering to assist us. After this incident occurred, there was certainly a lot of people who were running from the scene. Some of them deposited bags and parcels that they were carrying. Each one of those bags and parcels is being treated as a suspicious device at this point in time. We have multiple EOD teams that are checking each one of these bags. But at this point, we have not found another device. The three incidents that have occurred, two of them occurred simultaneously on Boylston Street. and the third one occurred at JFK about a half hour ago. People should be calm, but they should understand that this is an ongoing event, and they should understand that we need all the information that we can get available to us. Thank you.
Ed, thank you very much. I want to thank the Commissioner. I had a call from the President about half an hour ago who assured us that we would have full cooperation of the FBI, whose SAC is here, and the ATF, who are also on the ground. We have, as the Commissioner said, the State Police, the National Guard, fully deployed, and we thank them for their assistance. The Fire Marshal, the City Fire Marshal is here as well. So a lot of coordination in a very fluid situation. We are asking that people stay out of crowds and calmly make their way home, or if they're visiting, back to their hotels. All of the hotels' security will be prioritized at the outset. Again, if people have information, please use those tip lines. This is very, very important that we get as current information as we can as quickly as possible. Happy to take any questions.
Governor, can you talk about the marathon, the significance of what happened today?
Well, you know, the marathon is a pretty special day around here, as you know, and I started this morning visiting Mayor Menino in the hospital, who was devastated that he couldn't be at the marathon today. He's on his way here now, I think. Am I right? From the hospital, so obviously he is as concerned as the rest of us are about the safety of the people who come for this iconic experience here in the city.
Can you address reports that you're looking for a specific kind of truck or a specific kind of person?
No, there is no specific type of truck that we're looking for at this point in time. We are looking for any information that people have as to what they saw or might have heard at the site of the explosion or coming and going. We're investigating all leads right now.
What's the latest death and injury toll?
We don't have the number of casualties at this point in time. This is very early in this investigation. We wanted to get out here and give you as much information as we had, but we cannot tell you exactly how many people have been injured.
Commissioner, a lot of us heard a third explosion about an hour or so ago. Then there was a rumor that was a controlled explosion. Do you know what that was?
That was a controlled explosion on Boylston Street, but there was a third explosion at the JFK library that we believe is related.
And Commissioner, had the device that was found, or what's the history of that?
That was not, as I explained earlier, there are a number of parcels that have been dropped by people on the parade route, on the race route. Anything that's out there right now is being viewed as a suspicious device, and we are clearing each one of those items with an EOD team. They may be blowing things up over the course of the next few hours, but at this point in time, we have not found another device on Boylston Street.
Have there been any warnings leading up to this, any threats that something like this going on?
None. We talk about the threat picture all the time as we lead up to this particular event, and we have no information that this was going to happen.
Commissioner, can we tell us what happened at JFK? Just walk us through the timeline.
It's literally just unfolding. I don't have specifics. There was an explosion.
Earlier,
Sorry?
Around 3 o'clock there was a fire there. So does that happen after that? Or?
We got reports after 3 o'clock that there was an explosion.
Commissioner, any injuries at the JFK library?
None that we know of.
Are you describing this as a terrorist attack right now? Governor Patrick said it was an attack, but would you say this is a terrorist attack?
We're not being definitive on this right now, but you can reach your own conclusions based upon what happened.
Contact the police trying to claim responsibility for this?
At this point in time, no. Every asset of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the federal government is either here or coming here. As the governor said, the president has talked directly to the mayor as well as the governor, and I had a personal conversation with the director of the FBI who pledged any help that we needed. So we are stabilizing the situation at this point in time, but people should be cautious. That's all. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to try to do a next briefing at 7 o'clock, so it'll be 2 hours from now. So 7 o'clock next briefing. Again, the way to come in and out is to my left, your right. Is going to be the way to enter in and out. And again, we're looking at 7 o'clock to do the next briefing.
So that is the That's the situation you heard from Deval Patrick, the governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the police commissioner. We have a bit of a disagreement. The source for the word of an explosion at the JFK Library, which is rather far from Boylston, downtown Boston, is the commissioner himself. We had known about what came in as an electrical fire in an equipment room at the library. The National Archives, which runs the system of presidential libraries, is not confirming this as an explosion related to the Marathon explosion. So a bit of a disagreement. So the source on that terrorist explosion is the chief of police. We have to pause here to allow some stations to go to local coverage and welcome others to our live coverage. $5 p.m. here in the east, and that is the aerial picture of the aftermath earlier. This is what happened during the running of the Boston Marathon at the finish line, about an hour after the top-tier finishers. You see the smoke plume there from the first explosion, and there in the foreground, the orange flame, the moment of impact from a secondary explosion seconds later. It was instantly reminiscent of how a lot of bombings have been carried out overseas, a lot of bombings that have targeted our men and women in uniform. An initial explosion, a secondary explosion. Right at the moment, people are running in to help. We have since learned of at least a third explosive device that has been blown up in place and disposed of in the city of Boston. Biggest day in the city of Boston all year, always. Patriots Day, the Boston Marathon. This is videotape from the immediate aftermath. Being told something. Okay, this is on the Boston Globe website. We knew this existed. It's just coming in. Ground level view. And then the second explosion to the left. And I'm being told the photographer of the video, Steve Silva's on the phone with us. Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So you were using, hey, Steve, you were using a digital camera, just doing your job at the finish?
Yeah, I was at the finish line getting the late runners coming across. Most of those are charity runners at about 2:50 p.m., sitting right up on the finish line on, things just going along swimmingly. And then, boom, we heard a loud explosion right at the corner of Boylston and Exeter Street, about 15 yards from where I was. And smoke just billowed straight up into the air, and me and the other photographers just immediately ran over there. And within 20 seconds of that, just as we were starting to kind of get a grip on the scene, a second explosion went off up in the next corner. That would be Boylston and Fairfield Street. Apparently, both devices were in trash cans, and they went off, and it was carnage. It was just carnage. Glass blew out at the Marathon Sports Store by the first explosion. So we had a number of cuts and bruises, facial cuts. I actually saw a man who lost part of his leg. And then all the folks from the Marathon tent that were treating the runners obviously had to get called into action and came scrambling up to try to treat people as quickly as they could. The police, the fire, everyone was scrambling. It was a chaotic scene, and the injuries were nothing short of horrific.
And, Steve, I keep returning to the image of the one older man with the red or orange shirt who stands out so much because he was, among the runners, the first to go down in the overhead view right there in the foreground of the still picture. Just such a tragic thing. He was so close to finishing the race, and as we keep pointing out all day, for non-marathon runners, this is the achievement of a lifetime for so many people.
Yeah, and I can't even imagine what was happening further up the course, because we still had several thousand runners still to cross the line. The folks that are the 4-hour mark and beyond, and that's really the bulk of the runners. So they had to be corralled off there before we even got to Boylston Street. Everything turned quickly into a crime scene. We were all, escorted out. We are now currently in lockdown at the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel in the Marathon Media Center. We can't move, so we're just following instructions now and watching the news reports.
Steve, for folks watching around the country, I've been trying to figure out how to describe what this day is like every year in Boston. It's almost like New Year's Eve in Times Square in broad daylight in terms of crowds and side streets being crowded, people packed into the bars, people in hotels.
Yeah, it's, my whole life I've been living here since '85, and it's always been known as the best day in Boston. Patriots Day was at the Red Sox playing at 11 o'clock. Last year, when temperatures were up in the 80s, it was a perfect day for the runners. It was up 40 degrees at the start. And like you said, people have the day off. People are typically 10 feet deep along the sidewalk where the explosion went off. So there's a lot of people out there. Unfortunately, it turned a beautiful day into just a horrific day and nightmare.
Steve Silva, thank you very much. I'm sorry for the occasion that brings you to us. We've been talking to the man who took what is now this sought-after web video from Boston.com, just again calmly going about taking pictures of the runners at about the 4:09 finishing mark when all hell broke loose across from the Boston Public Library building there. Bill Bratton, former Boston commissioner, and for that matter, New York and L.A., is over in London. Boston native, watching, listening to all this. Commissioner Bratton, what more can you add? You've made your way to our London bureau. What more can you add about all this you've watched taking place?
Well, the location where the bombing occurred was probably about 25 to 50 yards from the actual finish line. The bombing seems to have occurred, based on the timing that you've identified, an hour to 2 hours after the lead runner would have come across the finish line. Good news about that, if that bombing had occurred at the time of the actual first runner, there would have been a lot more people in that area. But after 2 hours or so, the crowd has dissipated. That bomb went off in front of I'm very familiar with that corner. There's a bank on that corner, Exeter and Boylston. And I've worked that marathon as a police officer, as a sergeant, as a lieutenant, as a superintendent, and as a police commissioner. And it's, for me, as you might appreciate, just horrific. I have relatives running in that event, and was really just both shocked and concerned when I first heard of it.
And Commissioner, I mean, it's been described that side of Boylston, as opposed to the risers, the kind of
That's
reviewing
correct,
stands, had more kind of public access. It's hard to navigate the streets along the end of the route on this day every year, but I guess more of a possibility of some movement among pedestrians along that stretch.
Right, that area, looking at it, would probably have been a restricted area. You have bleachers on one side of the street, opposite the side of the street where the bombs apparently went off. But that block contains the, if you will, the press stand that goes across the street. That would normally be a restricted area. It would not be open to the general public. But again, as I mentioned, 2 hours before, when the actual race came to an end with the first runner, it would have been more crowded than it was at the time of the actual event. And that's the good news. The location of the bombing was probably intended also for maximum visibility of the media, because that literally is 25 to 50 yards from where cameras from all over the world are positioned to record that race.
And what do you think is the level of security if somebody wishing to bring a parcel like that, and I've heard more than one person now say that it was in a trash receptacle. Based on what you know, would they be encountered? There wouldn't be any mags. Would there be dogs as they came onto that block?
Well, the normal procedures, and I'm sure the Boston Police Commissioner in the days ahead will be speaking specifically to the security procedures. Normal procedures would be dogs, would be in some instances magnetometers in terms of very specific secure areas. As you saw, very sizable police presence along the route. As to the specificity, some of which they'll be able to speak to, other aspects of it they won't be able to talk to and won't talk about. that that portion of the event would have been one of the most highly secured locations of the event. It's the finish line. It's within 25 to 50 yards of the finish line. So it will be interesting over the next several days to hear what, in fact, occurred, that a device was apparently left or planted in that location.
And the good news, Commissioner, we will have, I am guessing, several different surveillance camera angles of this parcel and presumably the human who deposited it there.
Well, the good news is that there's a bank there, that there's a number of security. I'm very familiar with that area. I'm there all the time when I go to Boston. And there will undoubtedly be surveillance cameras. Also, heavy reportage in and around that area before the event. So even some of your news cameras may have picked up additional information. The police will certainly be seeking to get any video whatsoever that might pertain to that particular location.
Commissioner Bratton, thank you. We ask that as you learn things, please pass along information to us. Bill Bratton in our London bureau tonight. Pete Williams, our justice correspondent, continues to make calls and report this story out from our Washington bureau. Pete, what do you have?
Well, I was struck, Brian, by what the police commissioner said about urging people to stay home. The fact that there seemed to be, at least as far as his information goes, 2 separate incidents in 2 separate places in Boston, one at the scene of the marathon, the other at the JFK Library. And we also have seen a number of local communities raise their sort of alert level, putting more people on the street. And I'm assured, though, by a couple of federal officials I've talked to that this is not happening because of some additional information that something else is going on that we don't know about. That the Department of Homeland Security, for example, an official there tells me that it has not put out any kind of advisory urging local communities to be on a higher level of alert, that what we're seeing around town or around the country, here in Washington, around town, and around the country, New York, other cities taking precautions, is entirely driven internally, their own decisions to raise their level of security based on what they and the rest of us can see happening in Boston, on the concern that if somebody's doing it there, someone may try to be doing it somewhere else. There are lots of unconfirmed reports, Brian, that we're still trying to nail down. There's all sorts of conflicting information about whether there is or is not an arrest here. We don't know that for certain. But all we know for certain is what the police commissioner has said, and what we're told is that the additional security around the country is simply based on local police commissioners, their equivalent of the one we just saw, making this decision on their own.
Pete, it's bad enough, however, to listen to the governor say, stay home and avoid crowds and affect shelter in place.
Well, right, and that was what led me to wonder whether there was something larger at play here. But I'm told that as far as the people I've talked to, is the answer to that is no. That I think the reason they're saying that in Boston is they still are not confident that they have their arms around exactly what happened here. Different incidents in different places of town, that raises the level of concern about whether there could be someplace else that they don't know of yet. So until they can get a picture of what happened here, until they can reassure themselves that they have nailed this down and know the two ends of the bookends here, I think that's why they're saying that.
Okay, Pete, I want to back up. We keep going by these photos. They go by us unreferenced. We have pictures from the JFK Library. Those who visited know it's just got a beautiful spot out on the water. The president's boat, in fact, is part of the display in the sloping front lawn. You see Boston PD unit, Boston Fire unit outside, but then this next picture shows the char of black smoke out of the entrance. And this is the subject of differing reports and much speculation. We heard the police chief himself say we had a third explosion at the Kennedy Library. But all afternoon during our coverage, we were aware of what was called an electrical fire in an equipment room out there. So we're going on this explosion notion based on the word of the police commissioner, City of Boston. But that is one wing, actually the new wing of the JFK Library. I want to bring in David Abel. He was among the witnesses we have lined up to talk to us on the phone. David, where were you? You're with the Boston Globe, I should point out. Where were you when this happened? What did you see?
So I was standing on the finish line taking videos of runners coming in when the first blast occurred about 10 feet from where I was standing. I saw a large plume of white smoke, and then a few moments later, there was a second blast. And once I and other people that were right there realized what was going on, we saw what was essentially a pile of bodies. We saw a lot of horrific things, the worst things I've ever seen as a journalist. We saw a lot of blood, a lot of shattered glass. I still can't get the image of a woman who was clearly not breathing with her eyes open, staring straight up at the sky.
David, this is, all of us who've been overseas in war zones, these injuries are going to be absolutely consistent with the urban explosions we've seen in Baghdad, in Kabul, and certainly this methodology, an initial explosion and a secondary, is familiar to all those who fought wars overseas. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's definitely frightening. At first we were stunned by the explosion, weren't sure what was happening. A lot of people were thinking, as often is the case with explosions, that it was like a firework, perhaps a celebratory gun salute for the finishing runners. And the contrast is really jarring, because you had this moment of great bliss and celebration of runners just making it across the distance of the marathon, and then suddenly everything changed.
You're not the first person to say, and it's completely understandable, like a starting cannon in a sailboat race, that this was your initial. Who's thinking, terrorism at the finish line of the Boston Marathon, for goodness sake, that it was a planned outburst of some sort?
I think as soon as I heard, and anyone else who's in the vicinity heard the second explosion, we knew immediately, like when we saw the second plane hit the second tower of the World Trade Center, we knew immediately that this was premeditated, that this was a terrorist attack.
Yeah, that exact same thing occurred to me, that when one thing happens, it could be a gas line, it could be a quote-unquote natural occurrence in a big city. When the second one happens 20 seconds later, it's a good bit likely that this is an attack. David Abel, thank you very much. I'm sorry for what you've been through. Thank you very much for calmly reporting on it for us on live television. Mike Capos is another eyewitness who was there. Mike, what did you see?
Hi, Brian. I was actually at a restaurant called Town at the top level with a lot of windows, about 100 yards from the finish line. Kind of felt the first explosion. Everyone was a little rattled. And the second explosion happened, and from the windows, literally just saw a sea of people sprinting away from where it happened. Just a complete mob scene running in the other direction.
Mike, are you a Bostonian?
I've lived in Boston for about 6 years, originally from Rhode Island.
I was thinking today about the Ben Affleck movie, The Town, and how the plot line to a lot of people might have been outlandish. They were going to rob Fenway Park, and kind of the most unbelievable plot line you can imagine in Boston, except for this today. No one would believe explosions at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. It's hard to describe the kind of citywide party atmosphere one day a year in that city.
Yeah, I mean, it is unbelievable. I mean, I've celebrated the marathon for the last 6 years here, and just the sheer panic in people's faces. I'm currently at a friend Corey Griffin's condo. I mean, we've taken in people from abroad. People from London are here. Just giving them a place to charge their phones and make calls. We have people from California and Chicago, and it's very chaotic and frankly very scary.
And Mike, also, it's hard to overestimate the kind of number of people per runner who are in town. You know, if you've been training in Oklahoma City, if that's where you live, to come run the Boston Marathon, your support group is probably with you on the trip, and you've saved up for airfare and a hotel room or two, and this is such a big day. All those people from all different countries are crowded into the Boston metropolitan area today.
Yeah, I mean, I know people that are from all over the place that are here today, and a lot of people are asking where to go, and going back to your hotel is doesn't seem to be the safest place. I mean, but that's where we're telling everyone to go. Go back home, go back to your hotel, or get out of the city. But I mean, it's a scary place right now.
And at the same time, avoid crowds, which is not easy to do on Marathon Day, Patriots Day in Boston. Mike Capos, thank you very much for being with us. Thanks to all our eyewitnesses who have so calmly described this horrible thing that will leave so many people who just were in the vicinity in shock as a result. Just to update you on the latest figures, just into us from the Boston Globe, more than 100 people have been treated. And thankfully, that also can be injuries that, in the scope of things today, have to be called quite minor. If you were in that vicinity, in the blast shield area, and escaped with, a piece of shrapnel, given how fiendish and awful this is, I suppose you should be considered among the lucky. This is Boston General, I think, the ER entrance. And you see people running around with those foil blankets to retain the body heat for marathon finishers. We're all very familiar with, having seen them on TV. Patients are coming in wrapped in them as blankets. But again, this happened next to what we heard the WHDH reporter describe as the biggest emergency room in Boston on this day every year. It's set up to give emergency triage assistance to marathon runners. This, again, is the video from the Boston Globe website. We just spoke to the photographer who took it, and you have the first explosion, and then to the left, seconds later, you hear the dull roar of the second explosion. All of it taking place at the finish line. As former Boston Police Commissioner Bill Bratton pointed out correctly, at least it didn't happen at the very moment of finish, as you would have even more people crowded in there. We haven't done this in a while. Let's listen into our coverage over these pictures on WHDH, our NBC station, as they search for more explosives in Boston.
To detonate that with a controlled blast. But this is what they've been doing. And in fact, a lot of our crews out there, Janet Wu saw a number of officers and investigators sort of going up and down the streets looking for what else might be out there.
We'll stay on top of this for now. We mentioned earlier that our colleague Stephen Cooper he always runs the marathon, and nothing different this year. He ran it again. He joins us here in the newsroom, fresh off the streets. Coop, you have the floor. Tell us what happened, what you experienced, what you saw.
Well, Reed, basically, it was just like any other marathon. This was my 8th year in a row that I ran the Boston Marathon, and we were coming sort of into the home stretch, so to speak. So for all of us, the thousands of runners that sort of had come through Kenmore Square and were heading under the Mass Ave Bridge to make that turn onto Hereford and then down to Boylston, it was just sort of...
The TD Garden canceled for 7 o'clock against the Ottawa Senators. They will reschedule that as the city and authorities from the FBI to the ATF to the...
We seem to have had our audio lines crossed as this reporter for our NBC station was recounting his run today in the Boston Marathon. Someone else raised this issue. Remember, at the time of the blast, Boylston was then shut down because you had wounded runners, wounded onlookers, wounded public safety folks, and a cordon was put up. All these runners are underway at speed for the remaining length of the 26.2 miles. This happened, as far as we can tell, around the 4:09 mark. The finishers who had just gotten across will get their 4:09 certificates. But before that, you have miles of runners, thousands of runners yet to cross the finish line. And you can almost start to see the makings of the backup if you look down Boylston. Let's go to Chuck Todd at the White House. And Chuck, we've been talking to you mostly about the precautions security-wise at the White House, but of course the broader story is the president getting briefed on this. Whatever decisions the president chooses to make, we do know he called Governor Patrick right before that briefing.
Right, he's now gotten 2 additional briefings since then, one from the FBI Director Robert Mueller and one from the Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, and so he continues to be in receive mode. I can tell you that in the way these situations work, literally you have a group of analysts that are in the Situation Room. A lot of the national security aides, particularly his chief terrorism advisor, is going to be getting a lot of the reports through there, and they use that room for obvious reasons. It's a secure room, and it's where they have all of this intelligence coming in, and to use that as well to brief the president. So right now he continues to do that. As you reported, he's made phone calls. We do know that the Joint Terrorism Task Force has been activated between federal, state, and local in Massachusetts. And obviously with what we're seeing here with the mini low-grade lockdown that has taken place here as far as who can come and go into the White House complex, and people being, particularly tourists, being held off onto the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue. And we see plenty of uniformed Secret Service standing guard, and now vehicles going up and down just to make sure folks aren't loitering around.
And Chuck, for what it's worth, now the Boston Police Department is backtracking a little bit back to what we thought was the case before that briefing. This gets confusing. We heard the Boston Police Commissioner say there had been a 3rd explosion. He indicated it was related to all of this at the JFK Presidential Library. Boston PD, through its Twitter account, is now saying, update, JFK incident, meaning the John F. Kennedy Library, appears to be fire-related, which is exactly what we made of it all afternoon. So it's not consistent with an explosion related to this, which is good because we've got enough problems in central Boston.
No, that's right, and I know that the JFK Library itself just put out a statement saying all aspects of the idea that it's connected is speculation, and they didn't want to go from there. So we're in that mode where there's a lot of tidbits and not a lot of confirmation, and that's what the White House is trying to sort through in dealing with all of the various incoming that they have in, and trying to be careful. We know others have not been as careful, but be careful about what comes from a government official in particular.
No, that's right. Chuck, as you've been speaking, the White House has released a still photo of the president with 2 national security aides, Dennis McDonough's nearest to camera there, and also on the phone at the time he received his briefing on this, obviously in the Oval Office. Jim Miklaszewski reporting from the Pentagon. Officials tell NBC News there is no information to indicate there are any additional threats following this explosion. This is also a point Pete Williams made earlier. In effect, you could learn of a lot of precautions being taken, especially in major East Coast cities. It does not mean they're happening as a result of any additional threats. And, Chuck, we can't point that out often enough.
Well, and Brian, I had a security official tell me that had there been warnings in advance that you would have had a different style of security at the Boston. Yes, there was plenty of security because it's a major event going on a big day in Boston, but there wasn't the type of early warnings. You would have seen a difference in the style of security that Boston would have been going through had they had some sort of advanced warning or threat had come in.
Chuck Todd at the White House, thanks. I mentioned Boston Mayor Tom Menino earlier. You perhaps heard Governor Patrick say that he started his day by visiting the Boston mayor in his hospital room. Well, there turned out to be no keeping Mayor Menino down, even though he was in the hospital being treated for a broken leg, even though he has had so many health challenges just since this past winter, including a diagnosis of diabetes, and he had some heart trouble. He has decided not to run for re-election. He is, however, the longest-serving mayor in the modern history of Boston. He is the #1 booster of that city in this event. He apparently will bring this to you live when it happens, is heading toward the microphones to give his own press briefing and generally just say to the people of Boston, we'll get through this. Dean Walker, who has been really helpful to us, is part of the Universal Sports, another arm of this company, Universal Sports Network coverage that was up there in a production trailer not far from the finish line. If you've been watching our live coverage, Dean heard the first concussion and saw the second. And Dean, right now in that city with the subway shut down, and so many streets for such a wide area being shut down, it just must be the governor's warning to people to stay in place, stay home. They must have no other choice.
It's very true, because the area that the marathon that was running has been evacuated for quite a wide radius. And back where we are at our hotel, there's a large crowd of people in the lobby because they just have no place else to go right now. And a lot of family members are concerned because, at the time that this happened, there was still another 2 hours for the runners to be able to complete the course. So a lot of runners were still on the course when the explosions happened. And so their family members at this point don't really know where their family is because of the fact there's very sparse cell phone connections and texting. A lot of the runners weren't carrying their cell phones, so some family members are concerned.
And Dean, the other odd part is people are being told to avoid crowds. On this day in Boston, if you're outside the perimeter area where pedestrian traffic is allowed, to your point, you've got a race stretched through the city that kind of stopped in place. And I guess somehow they will figure out a system of finishers where people were running. You've got 26,000 just runners, and then there must be a 2-person per runner support staff average. It must be absolute gridlock in some parts of that city.
Oh, absolutely, and especially with the family members that are here. I have been speaking to people from Australia, from people from France, people from Russia who have come here to run the marathon because running the Boston Marathon is such a tremendous achievement for many runners because it's the only marathon that you run in that you have to qualify for. And so those 27,000 people running in this event train very hard and very diligently just to qualify for this marathon. And to come here and run it is such an honor. And so a lot of times they do bring a lot of their family and friends here to be able to watch them do it because it is such a personal historic event for them.
How long do you think the lockdown, and by that I mean if you're in a hotel, if you're in an apartment in the prohibited zone, you're going to be there for a while. You think tonight maybe people might be able to move around? We heard of a ground hold at Logan, so people with flight reservations may be in some trouble. There's no roadmap for this.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer because the fact that we were immediately after the blast, we were evacuated to the Fairmont Copley Hotel. And by the time we got over there, they weren't allowing anybody else in or out of that hotel because of the large mass of people inside. So at that point is when we decided to return to our own hotel, but making a very wide circle around the explosion area.
And Dean, the coverage was probably, we've decided what, a 4:09 mark puts it an hour after the elite top tier, 2 hours now after the elite top tier finishers of the race. For people not familiar with the race, can you define, we keep hearing these were charity runners at this point in the race, around the 4-hour mark. What does that mean?
Well, it's still most likely these were a lot of qualified riders, not the charity runners, because when the marathon takes off, because there is 27,000 people, they release them in waves. And that way, the start area is not congested, because if you send everybody at the same time, it would be a very hard situation for the runners to go through. So even though the race, the elite men took off at 10 a.m. Eastern, the runners behind them sometimes take over an hour or more to get up to the start line to start their own race.
Okay, got it. Dean Walker, Universal Sports. He's been very helpful to us today. He did not anticipate needing to do this today. He was simply in Boston as part of Universal Sports coverage of the Boston Marathon. We keep looking at this video of the emergency entrance at Boston General. These are, you see the silver blankets we've become familiar with in seeing them in marathon races over the years, being used just as triage blankets to keep people warm as they were transported. Every Boston EMS rig, all Boston Fire, Boston PD, all leaves canceled, all shifts reporting to work. We've treated 100 people at hospitals so far. Last death toll we had was 3. And the official number of injured has not agreed with the number of treated. So we're going loosely on that, but it's the Boston Globe reporting 100 treated so far. 5:36 p.m. here in New York, and to our north, an American tragedy at a great American tradition, the Boston Marathon. This is the view of it as taken from the camera platform high above the finish line in yellow there in the foreground. One explosion, and then between 15 and 20 seconds later, and we'll time it out with more specificity, a second explosion a distance away. We had pursued all possibilities that this was perhaps, and you see now the version from Boston.com, the Boston Globe's video arm on the web. We had pursued all possibilities that this was perhaps an underground gas explosion in an urban area. It just made, it would have been a little bit too much of a coincidence for this to have happened at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. The toll of dead and injured has been steadily climbing. The next briefing will be at 7 p.m. in the city of Boston. We will, however, be hearing from Mayor Tom Menino, who has left his hospital room, where he's been treated for complications from a broken leg, to come talk to the media on this extraordinary day for his beloved city. Pete Williams, our justice correspondent, has been working all of his sources in Washington on this story since first word arrived of these dual concussions in Boston. Pete, what can you tell us?
Well, it seems clear now that the authorities are still looking at packages that they find along the street of the parade route, or rather the marathon route in Boston. And if they can't resolve them immediately just by looking at them, they're destroying them. So we only know for certain, Brian, at this point, of 2 explosive devices, the 2 that went off that have been causing all the injuries, and what we know of the 2 fatalities so far. As you've been reporting, the possible 3rd one at the JFK Library turns out to be some understandable confusion in the chaos here. It was not an explosive device. authorities are looking at and destroying several others. But it's not clear to us that they're destroying them because they know they're explosive devices, or simply because they just don't want to take the chance to use the vernacular. They just don't want to screw around with it, and if there's any doubt, they're going to blow it up. So we only know of 2 so far, there had been there were many rumors, as you can understand. One was that the cell phone service had been shut down because of a thought that possibly these devices were set off, or a fear, a concern, that the devices might have been set off remotely by cell phone, which is a common technique around the country, around the world as well. But we haven't found any government official to confirm this, and we know that some cell calls are getting through, and one law enforcement official says it could be simply a matter that the system is overloaded, Brian.
Also, Pete, it's not giving away the nation's secrets. It's been written about. There's technology exists that was developed after the start of the war in Iraq that can go out on ahead of a vehicle and detonate by kind of sending a pulse out on all known frequencies, attempt to detonate explosives that may be along a parade route like this one.
Yes, and there are also devices, and this has also been written about, that are commonly used when high-profile people are traveling around, that can follow vehicles and sort of temporarily shut the cell service down in a small area. I've not heard of before the government, either local or federal, asking the phone company to shut down all cell service in an area, because, of course, the cell phones are also being used by first responders. Yes, they have their own radio systems and their own communication systems, but they also use cell phones a lot. So that would be a consequential decision to do that.
And as Pete points out, this conflicting report about the JFK Library, a good distance away, they did have a fire. It does not appear, based on all available information, to have been an explosion per se. It's certainly not associated or tied with the kind of explosions we've seen on Boylston today at the finish line. Yes, Pete.
As we're talking, AT&T has just issued a statement saying that customers may be experiencing issues with the cell service because of congestion, and they recommend that they use text messaging for emergencies. So they say our temporary Wi-Fi turned up for Boston Marathon will remain on for an extended time. So this seems to be the opposite of the suggestion that they were turning things off.
Okay, we just offered a Google Earth map there for folks, the basic outlines. You see the Presidential Library down at the far right-hand corner, the finish line upper left, and then to the upper right is Boston Logan Airport for those who've traveled into and out of Boston. We have this from the Tom Kenny, 43-year-old Army vet, recently returned from Afghanistan, had just finished running in the marathon today. Quote, I was about 50 feet away. I had just crossed the finish line. We were entering the recovery area when the first explosion went off. We heard the noise. We felt a little bit of the percussion wave. It sounded like an IED. That was the first reaction I had. That is actually the definition of the type of device that it is feared and suspected was set off today, Pete, whether it's in a military or civilian setting.
Well, that's right. And, I mean, you know, there's a lot of sort of informed speculation going on about the nature of the strength or size of these devices and what they might be composed of. I have not, the federal officials I've talked to have not seen any kind of definitive information on what these devices were, whether they were pipe bombs, what the explosive was. But there's a lot of sort of armchair analysis based simply on what can be seen and heard. The size of that picture there, the white smoke suggests perhaps a commonly used high explosive in a lot of terror bombs. But then, on the other hand, is, despite the number of injuries here, the relatively low strength of these devices in terms of what they might have been for a relatively small package. Not a lot of structural damage to the buildings that are adjacent there. So, I mean, I guess it goes without saying here that if this could be a lot worse. Why these devices were composed the way they were, you know, was it a last-minute thing? Could they have made it bigger? Who knows? But that's just sort of informed speculation based on people who know about explosives who are watching the same scenes we are.
Pete, just to let the folks know, what kinds of federal agencies have offices in Boston? What kinds will be en route to Boston from Washington?
Well, the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives have offices there and are on the scene. In addition, they're both sending additional technicians to help with the investigation. They'll be the primary investigating agencies that will respond. Of course, Homeland Security has people there as well. But in terms of the initial response and explosives, and investigating and interviewing witnesses and helping the Boston police with this, those are the ones who'll be in charge.
Pete Williams, thanks. Those viewers just joining us, we've had a terrible chain of events on what is usually the happiest and biggest day every year in the city of Boston, Patriots Day, the Boston Marathon. Here's what happened, the first of two explosions. As you see there, the finish line is just in the foreground of this picture at the 4:09 mark after the start. After the elite first-tier finishers had gone through, to set the scene for you, 5:45 now as we say this. At 6:10 Eastern Time, the president is going to address the nation about what has happened in Boston today. This is the ground view of that explosion from the Boston Globe website, boston.com. We will have the president's remarks live, obviously. We will have a special 1-hour edition of NBC Nightly News tonight, and then we will be back on the air with a primetime special, 10 p.m. tonight, 7 on the West Coast, on what we have witnessed, and hopefully we will know more by then. Certainly what appear now to be two planned explosions, two devices that were set there and set off for the finish of the Boston Marathon in Boston. They have discovered and exploded at least one other device. We have just witnessed a moment of silence in the House of Representatives. We have another eyewitness, Dan Mercurio. Dan, I understand that you are probably going to show up in some of the video of the finishers because you had just passed by where we see the camera location, had just finished the race when the explosion went off?
I had finished about 10 or 15 seconds before it went off.
And tell us what you witnessed. I imagine you reacted with a start, looked back over your shoulder, and saw a plume of smoke.
Exactly, yeah. It was kind of unbelievable. I had finished with a friend of mine that I was running with, and we had literally just, it felt like we had just gotten over the finish line and people were congratulating us. And all of a sudden, you just heard something rock the entire ground. I mean, the ground was shaking. And we turned around and saw the thick gray smoke kind of billow out from this area where there were quite a few people standing. And before we had time to really digest what was happening, the second one went off. And that's when we realized that, there was something seriously wrong, and we got out of there as fast as we could.
Dan, can you understand the folks who said they thought it was, initially they thought it was a finishing cannon of some sort? They thought it was something planned.
Yeah, you could have thought that if you had been further away from where I was standing, and the way the smoke was and how loud it was, you could tell it was something way more severe than that. It was definitely some kind of bomb type of device. I mean, it was pretty evident from where I was.
What do you think happened up the route? What is there a way of saying, in your view, what percentage of marathon runners, of the 27,000 of you, had passed the finish line at the 4:09 mark, and what percentage remained strung out along the route, underway and at speed?
Yeah, I would say a little bit more than half of the runners were done at that point. But there were still a large amount of runners that were just turning the corner. I mean, it was, kind of the middle of the pack.
Where are you now? What have you been told? And what does it feel like in Boston right now?
it's just everyone's in a state of utter shock right now and disbelief that this could happen here. I ran the marathon last year, and it's literally, the best day of the year in the city, and everybody is just absolutely stunned. We've been told nothing. I'm in my apartment now in Boston. I was able to walk home, but all the police have been patrolling and telling everyone to stay inside and not to leave until you hear anything else. It's been just devastating, really. I mean, it's really unbelievable.
And Dan, of course, among marathon runners, there's kind of almost fewer than 6 degrees of separation. You get to know the people around you. You sometimes a lot of people run with a buddy. They train with a buddy. They know other people in the race. So there's going to be that inevitable search for information. People starting numbers, finishing numbers, wanting to know if everybody made it out okay.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of crying where we were. I mean, people trying to find loved ones and people that were, finishing the race behind us. My best friend was 2 minutes behind me, and I luckily found him about a half an hour later. He was turning the corner as the second explosion was happening and had the wherewithal to run the other way. But I mean, I couldn't even imagine that. It was just kind of a state of panic for a while there.
Just this video as it comes in, if you know Boston at all, and you know these streets at all, seeing them with yellow tape, what Mike Lupica said earlier, is just one of the great walking cities in this country. You got Newbury Street right nearby. This is a terrific, beautiful urban area, and on this day of all days,
it's hard to believe. It really is. I mean, this day in particular, and we had great weather today for a marathon. There were hundreds and hundreds of people just in that area of the finish line alone. But people trailing the course the entire 26 miles. It's part of the reason what makes Boston so unique. You get people along either side of you the entire way cheering you on. So this is devastating.
Dan Mercurio, thank you very much for being with us after what you've witnessed. Congratulations for you on finishing the marathon, which is an achievement I imagine people will kind of quickly forget about, despite all it represents today, because of what this day will now stand for in the rest of the history of this great race. Alicia Lane is with us from KNBC TV, but today finds her in Boston. Alicia, you're in a hotel. What have you witnessed there today?
I'm no longer in a hotel, actually, Brian. We were in the Lenox Hotel, which was about 150 feet from where the two bombs exploded. At the time, I'm here to see my best friend run the race. She had already made it through, but we hadn't met back up with her. We were waiting for her in a hotel restaurant, and that was when we were sitting right next to the window. This massive explosion occurs, and we felt it. We saw smoke. Then another one about 10 seconds later went off, and everybody in the restaurant panicked. There were people running and screaming, and clearly no one knew what was going on. It was terrifying, frankly. And so we all moved to the back of the restaurant, and we were trying to get clarity on what had taken place. Obviously, everyone was, frightened and trying to find their loved ones, trying to make phone calls. And then the Boston PD came in a short while later, told us all to turn off our cell phones, all of our devices, because they thought that it could perhaps detonate another bomb. And at that point, everyone was just inside watching the news, and I had no access to anything. I couldn't move in or out of the hotel. No one could get in. At which point, they came back in a short while later and ushered us all out. They evacuated our hotel. So I've been out of my hotel since probably shortly after the bombs exploded.
And does it feel like a bit of a lockdown there? I heard the governor say, stay where you are, but also avoid crowds. Of course, there's no way to move traditionally on this day in Boston without being in the thick of a crowd.
Yeah, it's really difficult. When we were first ushered out of the hotel, the streets were flooded with people, just flooded, everyone sort of walking aimlessly, not really knowing where to go. And up until about an hour ago, it remained that way, and that was when the governor and when the police commissioner had, issued the command for everyone to clear the roadways and get out of the streets, and also the police on the roads were telling us the same because they didn't want anybody congregated in large groups. And so it's very strange. It's actually quiet right now. There are a lot of people walking the streets, but there are no longer crowds anywhere. There are a lot of police personnel we've seen tons of ambulances. In fact, there were about 20 lined up on one of the streets we passed by, and I asked the gentleman inside why they were lined up like that, and they said they were there for triage purposes because of the explosions, which, you know.
Yeah. Well, we've been saying Alicia, there's one silver lining, and that is the number of medical professionals who are at the finish line anyway.
Right.
For race day, almost 1,000 of them to treat, blisters, to treat exhaustion, dehydration. Sadly, some of them were probably going to end up being hit by shrapnel along with some of the cops and race volunteers, but at least triage happened quickly, and there were ambulances for the end of the race, as there always is, so transport happened faster than possible, so we got to cling to whatever good news we have.
Right, and I also spoke with two women who were volunteer nurses in that emergency unit at the end of the finish line. I spoke with them both in depth about what they saw and what they experienced. They said it was very methodical, it was very organized, everyone worked together very well. One of the women I spoke with, one of the RNs told me that one of the deceased was an elderly woman, and that the injuries that were suffered were really life-altering. Limbs lost, down to the
we've lost Lane in taking the feed of
several explosions happened on Boylston Street in the last 2 hours. Boston Police, State Police, all state public safety officials are working together. All state public safety officials are working together on the issue. The governor and I have spoken with the President of the United States just a half hour ago, and he's offered all the assistance he can to us during this investigation. Myself, as mayor, I offer my condolences and prayers to the families that are involved in this explosion. But also, family needs some assistance. They can call the mayor's hotline at 635-4500 if they need some information over the next 24 to 48 hours. But let me just say that this is a tragedy. We're going to work together on this, and the Boston Police, the State Police, FBI, all the agencies we just met, and we're committed to working together and making sure that we come to a finality of what happened this afternoon. And the governor has been very helpful to us on several issues this afternoon. So I'll turn it over to the governor and have him say a few words.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks so much for coming out to us today. Obviously, we all send out our condolences to the victims and their families. We are asking everybody to stay out of the perimeter of the explosions, about a 15-block area which has been secured by the state police. That is a crime scene right now, and it's very, very important that helping people do their job, law enforcement do their job, that people stay out of that area. We said earlier it's probably best that most people make their way calmly home, and if they're visiting the city, back to their hotel. The commissioner has prioritized security at the hotels, just so that for everyone's peace of mind. We are working on a, I guess the term we're using is a drop-in center in the city, so that people who are trying to find runners or family members who didn't meet at the usual meetup place because the race was cut short, will be in a position to announce that, we hope, very shortly, so that people can find some assistance to help people find their loved ones. But I really am grateful that all of the federal, state, and local law enforcement officials are coordinating so closely and so well. They are talking constantly. They are all in investigation mode right now. It's a very serious time, so we do need people to stay out of the area of the explosion for the time being.
Michael, please, Commissioner, say a few words. Commissioner,
I'd like to clarify one statement. The device at the JFK Library was actually an incendiary device or a fire. We haven't linked that directly to this incident. So right now, this incident consists of 2 explosions that occurred on Boylston Street. The information that we got about 15 minutes before the prior press conference could very well be premature. But we are still asking people to be calm. to go to their homes and to work closely with us. If they have information, we need to hear about it. That's 1-800-494-TIPS. As the governor said, the area, about a 15-block area around the blast site, will be closed down for the next 24 hours and maybe further than that. People should be aware of that when they make plans for tomorrow.
Is there any security footage of any of these explosions?
We are looking at all of that right now. That's one of the investigative steps that we're taking.
Was there any plan now? According to BostonGlobe.com, they said they were doing drills this morning for the same exact thing that happened, according to BostonGlobe.com. Now, was you guys given any warning ahead of time of this taking place?
As I said earlier, there was no specific intelligence. We certainly increased our posture around a big event like this. All of those things happened in preparation for this event, but there was no specific intelligence that anything was going to happen.
And could you talk a little bit about what type of device? Do you have any idea what type of device?
At this point in time, it's too early to get into the specifics. These were powerful devices that resulted in serious injuries. And it's too early to tell.
Is there someone in custody might have a suspect?
Those reports are not true. There is no suspect in custody. We're questioning many people, but there is no one in custody at this point in time.
Do you have any update on the casualties of this event?
Again, we're still compiling that information, but we hope to have a count as soon as we can work with the hospitals and the public health people.
The department told us 2 people dead. Is that accurate? The tweet was 2 people dead, right? The Boston Police Department.
There are fatalities. I won't get into the details on that.
Is that tweet correct?
You shouldn't read anything into that.
As a matter of protocol, are you looking at garbage cans and are you looking into garbage cans? Are they scouring the area, looking at all types of possibilities?
Anything that is unattended right now, any package that is unattended, is being treated as a potential problem, and we are methodically going through the area to make sure we check each particular parcel and item that's out there.
Guys, we're going to call this for now. We'll be back with some more information when we have it. And thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.
Just for some background, if you're, say, a 20-year-old college student, grew up in Boston, you'd be forgiven for thinking your mayor will forever be named Menino. He's been mayor for 20 years. Tom Menino was in the hospital this morning. There you see Governor Deval Patrick, who started his day by visiting the mayor in the hospital. The mayor's had a number of health challenges, longest-serving mayor in Boston history. He has decided not to run for re-election, but you cannot keep him down on a day like today. And he got cleaned up and came over to brief the press. We did learn some new details. Police Commissioner, as you heard, backing off those reports that whatever happened at the Kennedy Library was related to this, much, much less certain. A fire or incendiary device is the new story, but the library officials have said it was just an electrical fire out there. We have lost 2 souls in this today, 100 injuries, 2 confirmed dead at the finish line bombing of the Boston Marathon. Just a time check, 6:02 Eastern, and we're told to expect the president in the briefing room at the White House under 8 minutes from now. We'll, of course, carry his remarks live. Part of the grisly nature of the job of president, in addition to sending men and women into battle and getting the very worst news usually first. We remember the president's remarks on the day of Newtown, and the president has a sad task again today after this loss of life, day of great widespread injury in Boston. What is usually the most, the happiest day of the calendar in Boston, Mass. Patriots Day, the running of the Boston Marathon. The Red Sox played earlier today, and instead, virtually a 15-block area in central Boston is now locked down except for public safety officials. As you heard the governor say, it's now a crime scene. This was the first photo we saw this afternoon on social media indicating to us, we got first word of this via Twitter, that there had been a blast, an explosion along the route of the marathon. Then we saw that first photo showing a plume of smoke in the background and an orange flash in the foreground. We later learned the explanation, as you look at the grisly after effects, the reason we're talking about 2 fatalities, mass casualty event, 100 injuries, all of the detritus left there some of it of human life on the sidewalk. But that foreground explosion is the second blast. They were timed between 15 and 20 seconds apart. All day long, we've been talking to eyewitnesses. We've been talking to our own correspondents. We're also joined by our own Michael Leiter, our national security analyst, former head of the Counterterrorism Center for the federal government. Michael, it's been some time since you and I spoke. Enough time has elapsed. We have public officials now saying, calling this a bombing, saying these were devices that were left there. Are you content with all the other precautions, and are you content, based on what's in the public domain, based on perhaps your own reporting and phone calls, that this is isolated to Boylston in Boston?
Brian, I don't think I would yet say that things are isolated, that we know things are isolated there. I think that's the most likely outcome, but I think that officials are taking really excellent precautions in a number of cities around frequently populated areas to make sure that there aren't things that they don't yet understand. What everyone in the national security community will be scared of now are the things that they don't know and what they don't see, and that's what the precautions are for. So I think we've seen a couple of things over the past several hours. First, the standard rule that first reports are wrong, we've seen that to be the case. I think there's still a lot of confusion about whether or not there are other devices or were other devices found. The answer is we're not sure. So I think officials in Boston and Washington and New York and San Francisco who are securing certain areas, increasing the police presence, doing some additional screening, I think that's exactly the right course.
And, Michael, let's talk about something else that you don't hear much discussion of, but I think it's important and germane. We've been at war now for over a decade. It was brought to our doorstep on 9/11. This graduating class, if you'll forgive the flip expression, of people in the national security apparatus, they've been forced to learn, and you're among them, so much about tactics, about the threat, about materiels, that at least that kind of intellectual power is behind this, and we are different when faced with this. We think about it from different angles than had this been 15 years ago.
Brian, that is absolutely right. 15 years ago with Oklahoma City, or even in 2001, the level of expertise, the depth of the counterterrorism bench was so remarkably thin. And people weren't flying blind, but they had much less background. Today, we've established joint terrorism task forces led by the FBI, partnering with communities across the country. Boston is a great example of that. You have people throughout the federal government who have worked on this and nothing else for 12 years. So that is a great strength that we have. What we do have to make sure is that people don't fall into presuming that this is the same groups, the same modus operandi, the same approach that they've seen in the past. And you know, that's the one caution I would add. But the depth of understanding about devices, tactics, groups, follow-on threats, precautions to take after an attack are vastly improved since 9/11.
Michael Leiter in our D.C. Bureau, where he continues to help us report these developments, we're still coming to grips with, and as he correctly points out, first reports are wrong. It is axiomatic in law enforcement and the national security business. If we can, let's take a shot of the Brady briefing room in the West Wing of the White House. We're going to keep a very close eye on that room, on that doorway. Chuck Todd is standing by there. And, Chuck, we're within the ballpark here of when we were told to expect the president.
Right, we expect him. We just saw some notes being put on the podium, so we may be within the unofficial 2-minute window. We know he's been getting a whole bunch of briefings since 3 o'clock, since he made those initial phone calls, the briefings by the Homeland Security Director, the FBI Director. We also know the president's reached out to Speaker Boehner, and they just announced, by the way, the 2-minute warning over the PA system. We also know the president just recently and within the last half hour spoke to the Speaker of the House on the incident, presumably updating him about the information that he knows and perhaps maybe sharing with us. A lot of times in situations like this, Brian, he actually does come here with sort of some of the official things that the government does know as of this time. So we expect this to be not just him playing consoler-in-chief, but also providing the update that they feel comfortable sharing with us.
Chuck Todd, thank you. We recognize that a lot of our NBC stations would normally be in the middle of local news coverage or perhaps the afternoon talk shows that precede local news, except for what happened today at the finish line of the Boston Marathon in Boston. 2 different devices exploded. Our working death toll, we've lost 2 people today in Boston, 100 injured. 2 dead, 100 injured. Those are the last numbers. Perhaps the president's remarks will update those numbers. For easily a 15-block perimeter, a 15-block area of downtown Boston has been virtually shut down to all civilians. Certainly all pedestrian traffic. The subway system has been stopped. For a time, all transportation in and out of the city was stopped. So far, no reason to think a threat exists anywhere else but on Boylston Street in Boston, Massachusetts this afternoon. Earlier reports of a subsequent bombing at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library are being knocked down. But for now, we are in the midst of a huge and expanding investigation. Next up, we hear from the President of the United States in the briefing.
Good afternoon, everybody. Earlier today, I was briefed by my Homeland Security team on the events in Boston. We're continuing to monitor and respond to the situation as it unfolds, and I've directed the full resources of the federal government to help state and local authorities protect our people, increase security around the United States as necessary, and investigate what happened. The American people will say a prayer for Boston tonight, and Michelle and I send our deepest thoughts and prayers to the families of the victims in the wake of this senseless loss. We don't yet have all the answers, but we do know that multiple people have been wounded, some gravely, in explosions at the Boston Marathon. I've spoken to FBI Director Mueller and Secretary of Homeland Security Napolitano, and they're mobilizing the appropriate resources to investigate and to respond. I've updated leaders of Congress in both parties, and we reaffirmed that on days like this there are no Republicans or Democrats. We are Americans, united in concern for our fellow citizens. I've also spoken with Governor Patrick and Mayor Menino and made it clear that they have every single federal resource necessary to care for the victims and counsel the families. And above all, I made clear to them that all Americans stand with the people of Boston. Boston police, firefighters, and first responders, as well as the National Guard, responded heroically and continue to do so as we speak. It's a reminder that so many Americans serve and sacrifice on our behalf every single day, without regard to their own safety, in dangerous and difficult circumstances. And we salute all those who assisted in responding so quickly and professionally to this tragedy. We still do not know who did this or why, and people shouldn't jump to conclusions before we have all the facts. But make no mistake, we will get to the bottom of this, and we will find out who did this. We'll find out why they did this. Any responsible individuals, any responsible groups will feel the full weight of justice. Today is a holiday in Massachusetts, Patriots' Day. It's a day that celebrates the free and fiercely independent spirit that this great American city of Boston has reflected from the earliest days of our nation. And it's a day that draws the world to Boston's streets in a spirit of friendly competition. Boston is a tough and resilient town, so are its people. I'm supremely confident that Bostonians will pull together, take care of each other, and move forward as one proud city, and as they do, the American people will be with them every single step of the way. You should anticipate that as we get more information, our teams will provide you briefings. We're still in the investigation stage at this point, but I just want to reiterate, we will find out who did this, and we will hold them accountable. Thank you very much.
Chuck Todd, directly in front of where the president was just standing, he emphasized, Chuck, what is obvious, and that is how early on, we just heard this from Michael Leiter repeating that adage in law enforcement, first reports are wrong. President can't get out ahead of this and say too much too early, and it's going to be a busy night for investigators.
And to hear him say, we don't know this, we don't know who did this, and not even a hint about whether this was domestic or international, I think it says a lot about what we don't know on this front. He made a point, clearly made a point not to use the word terrorism for now. We know that some Boston officials have used that. We know some folks on Capitol Hill on that. And, you know, sometimes everybody says, why do you parse certain words? Well, certain words do matter at certain points in time. But it was interesting to hear the president say whoever did this, whether a person or a group, will feel the full justice of this. So probably the most striking thing, Brian, is how much information we don't know and how the president went ahead and emphasized that.
Chuck Todd at the White House, thank you. In the briefing room in the West Wing, Pete Williams, our justice correspondent, continues to work the phones, work this story. Pete, anything to add?
Well, I think that it's safe to say that the concern about the possibility that this could have been spreading around Boston and that they didn't know where it was going next is slowly starting to abate a little bit, though, but it hasn't gone away. Because they still don't know who did this, and until they know that, they can't know that whoever is out there might not be plotting something like this again. It was useful to hear from the Boston authorities sort of knocking down some rumors out there that they had a suspect in custody. They are questioning a number of people. We know for sure that there are police and federal agents talking to people, not only who were at the scene, and who were witnesses, but also talking to people who are in hospitals that had injuries. And it is, of course, oftentimes the case that people who set off bombs don't get away. And so the mere fact that they're injured doesn't simply mean that they're victims. They may have been involved. And we know that there are federal authorities and state authorities talking to people in the hospitals, but nobody has been considered or declared a suspect at this point. You know, I think it's safe to say that we've seen a lot of additional security being laid on simply by people who are watching this. Airports are adding additional security now. Cities are putting security around hotels. You can be sure that if there are, you know, rock concerts, any kind of gatherings, that there's going to be extra security at those places. Whether they'll be able to change it substantially in terms of putting metal detectors in places where there weren't, probably that can't happen very quickly. But we are told that there's no national directive urging authorities to do this. And as the Boston Police Commissioner said, no advance credible, or I guess he used the term specific, no specific intelligence that anything like this was plotted. And I haven't heard, Brian, in the last couple of hours I've been using the phone here, that they've uncovered any intelligence that they overlooked that suggested something like this, A, was coming to Boston, or B, was planned for anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm not sure any of this is good or bad. Pete Williams from our Washington newsroom. Pete, thanks. A quick word to our NBC stations. Again, we're normally in, here on the East Coast anyway, what is local news time. We'll be yielding the air here for a few minutes starting at 6:20 Eastern Time. And again, if you're watching in the East, we're back on the air with NBC Nightly News, a full hour tonight at 6:30. To Lisa Myers we go briefly. And Lisa, a lot of people involved in the marathon. Again, it's not that many shades of separation between people in the marathon, but a whole lot of folks know someone who's running, and they would be curious to track them, make sure they're okay, especially with cell phones down in most of Boston.
Absolutely, Brian. And we have some numbers where people, phone numbers and websites where people can go. The first place is the Boston Mayor's Hotline, 617-635-4500. They can help you locate friends and families. The Red Cross has a website, redcross.org/safe-and-well. They say, be patient. It's got heavy traffic now, so it's loading slowly, but you can post there that you're okay so your family and friends know. third is that Google has set up a people finder. Last thing we knew, they were tracking about more than 800 people, and you can find someone there or allow people to know you're okay. The other question we asked the Red Cross was about the supply of blood. They said they have sent 100 extra units to the Boston area hospitals, but they believe they have enough blood on the shelves to handle the situation. Back to you, Brian.
Lisa, we heard a lot of runners got out of the race, went over to already line up to donate blood, having heard and some of them having experienced the explosion behind them. The rest of the race was frozen in place. Quick follow-up, you saw us make a change on the fly there. The Boston Mayor's hotline, Lisa just read to you. She read the correct number. We showed the wrong number on the screen. 4,500 are the last 4 digits of the Boston Mayor's hotline. We heard that from Mayor Menino himself earlier today. So again, a 10-minute break in our live coverage in effect to allow our East Coast television stations to get on, and then we'll be back on the air 6:30 Eastern Time for a special hour-long edition of NBC Nightly News tonight, covering the twin bombings at the finish line of the Boston Marathon today. 2 dead, 100 injured thus far. We'll be back on the air shortly. I'm Brian Williams in New York.